Hello, and in today's video about Maelstrom Prophecy, I just want to talk about some of the basic concepts about the campaign and about the game. So there was a question on the last video about the sort of general power level, and because of the way Maelstrom is, because of the way the game is designed, because of the way it runs, because of the way the campaign will be designed, this will very much be a lowish fantasy. It's not going to have sort of plate mail-clad heroes wielding 6 feet long swords, riding dragons into battle, and so on. And it's not going to be sort of sword and sorcery. It's very much going to be like Maelstrom Doomsday is, normalish people against something that threatens the entire country. So that's really baked into the rules. That's baked into the campaign. But it's worth mentioning that there are different ways games can be run. So if you look at some of the games out there, obviously you look at something like D&D. Let's move my pointer across here. You look at something like D&D. So if you look at D&D and you're level 1, you're level 1, okay, and then you're level 20, actually you've got a curve like that, because a level 10 is a lot better than a level 1. And if you think back to D&D, a level 20 character is never going to be threatened by a one-hit dice monster or a level 1 character ever. That's not happening at all. And even in something like, so we'll put D&D on there, even if we put sort of something like AFF, okay, so skill 7, skill 12, you've still got quite a steep curve, because in AFF, because it's a 2d6 bell curve, someone with a skill of 12, an average combat roll, for example, is going to give them 19. Now, so that's an average. You're going to get at least 19, something like 60% of the time with 12 skill. Whereas the character or creature with 7 skill is only going to be able to attain 19 on a double 6, which happens 1 in 36 times, so 3% of the time. So 3% of the time, the lower end character can match the score that the better character gets 60% of the time. Okay, so realistically, unless the 7 skill character gets lots of criticals and the 12 gets lots of fumbles, that's not happening. Even something like Savage Worlds, on Savage Worlds, you've got novice, you've got seasoned, you've got veteran, you've got heroic, you've got legendary. Even there, although the curve is somewhat shallower, you've still got this increase. And yes, a novice character could, with loads of acing dice, beat a legendary character. But it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen very often. And a lot of games are like that. Now, obviously, if you then look at Classic Traveller, you pretty much got that. You got a little bit of improvement here and there. But what you saw in Traveller was you weren't improving your skills or your stats or whatever. What you were improving was your contacts, your gear, your equipment, your knowledge, your resources. And that is what made a later campaign better in Classic Traveller than an early campaign, but not a lot better. Okay. So let's move all that over so that we can. It's a bit difficult to use the mouse on my tablet screen. There we go. Right. So what happens then in Doomsday? Oh. Or what happens in Maelstrom? Okay. So what you get is you've got, say, age 14 when you start, and you've probably got age 60, and it's probably it's possible to continue past them for certain characters, but not easy. Okay, so let's move that at the bottom. So you've got your stats. We'll do the stats in black. So when you start, everything is at 40 odd. Okay, so 40 for stats. So you start, and they get better and better and better and better up until you get to about 30-ish. when they start to level out, because after 30 you get a little bit of aging, but you've still got some experience and so on. So they tend to equal each other out just about. Okay. But then what happens is they start to go down. And what you've also got to remember is there is a cap on statistics, which is 110 minus your age. So age 60, the maximum any can be is 50, the maximum. But because of aging, they're all going to be going down and down and down. And so by the time you get to 60, many of them are going to be in the 20s and 30s, okay, which is really going to limit you, at least for any sort of physical character. So if we have a warrior type, your attack skill, your defense skill, your missile skill, your speed, your endurance, your agility, they're going to start off okay-ish at age 14, and they're going to get better and better and better. So we have almost a peak. Now, if we then use red to look at the abilities, at age 14, you have none. So we have none. We have up to about 10. Okay, rank 10. So what you tend to get is that. So what we can now see is that at age 60, you've got lots of abilities. You've got lots of things that boost what you can do automatically. If it's something like a crafting skill, you've got lots of abilities that boost what you can do when you take physical action. So combat training, you do more damage, your armor's more efficient. So a 60-year-old warrior does more damage when they hit with the same weapon and the same sort of result as a 14-year-old warrior, because they're more experienced. They can hit in a more controlled way. Their armor is better. They've got a slightly higher crit chance, etc. But of course, they've got a lower chance to hit because they've only got 35 attack skill rather than the 40 on the younger character. What we also then see is negative events. So we're talking things like injuries. Now, some of these are created during character generation. So it's entirely possible to have a character with a really bad leg injury that halves your speed. Okay, so obviously at the young age, you've got very few of these, and then they tend to get more and more and more and more. Okay, so you accumulate bad effects. Now, I know this personally. I'm past 50 now, and when I wake up in the morning, my left knee aches and my back's beginning to go. And as you can see, I'm having to wear glasses for reading now. And my bicep I tore playing cricket and so on. And these things do accumulate over time. And so if we were then to use the multicolour one, let's do a slightly fatter pen now. Okay. And we sort of do general effectiveness, we get something like that, a curve. And there is probably a sweet spot around here somewhere, certainly for a physical character, and magical characters will be slightly different, but for a physical character, you've got that sweet spot around mid-30s-ish, mid to late 30s, where aging isn't really kicking in, and when it does, it's only to a minor effect. You're pretty good with your abilities. You're maxing out some of them, you're getting near max with others, you've got a good spread. And you've not accumulated too many negative events yet. So there's around that sweet spot. So a discussion I've had with a lot of people about these type of characters is, well, what if I create a character here, a really young one? They're not very good compared to that later optimal character. But what you've then got effectively is this bit to this bit. In a way, it's a bit like D&D or Savage Worlds. You start off not great, and you get better and better and better. Okay. Whereas what doesn't happen in D&D is you keep getting that curve going upwards, whereas here you go downwards. So if you create a character at that middle point, you're probably thinking, woohoo, I've got an optimal character. You have, but bear in mind, this is going to be the first 15, 20 sessions. You have a very limited lifespan. Whereas if you create a character here at a young age, you've got 15 or 20 sessions before you hit your peak and then start declining. You've got 40 sessions maybe before that character needs to be retired. Now, of course, what you also do have let's just try a different colour. Let's try purple. Is you also get something of an increase in resources over time. So the 14-year-old might, if they're a warrior, they might be equipped with a spear and a shield if they're lucky. That's it. Whereas the 6-year-old warrior is probably going to have pretty decent armor, weapons, and so on. So the character changes over the course of the campaign. And unlike most RPGs, in this, they will get better, then they will get worse. But they only get worse in certain ways. Okay, and then you get better in certain ways. So let me put that back to a 3-point red. So how does this apply then across the course of a campaign? Because a campaign in Prophecy is going to be a lot longer than those 20 or 30 years, or many of them will be anyway. So what it means is we have player 1, okay, who will do in red. So year 0, say year 80. Say we do an 80-year campaign. So what it means, let me just put some numbers on to orient myself. Always label your axes. That's something I teach my science customers all the time. So player 1 starts with a 35-year-old character. So they're pretty good. They're up here, they start. But of course, what happens is they go down, which means they then get a new character, which does that. Oh, I don't know what happened there. Then they get a new character, which means by the time they hit the end, they're pretty good. But they've been really, really effective both at the start and in these middle periods. So what about player 2? Because you're going to have, say, a party of 4 players here. Well, player 2 starts with a really young character. They're not that effective. But what happens is they get better and better and better. Okay, so by the time they hit the end of their campaign, they're actually in decline. But they've got experience and they've got knowledge. And so they're going to be pretty good in these bits. Here. Okay, then let's look at purple. So we look at player 3. Well, player 3 might start with a 50-year-old character, pretty much the oldest they can get. And actually, they're on the decline already. So you get something like this. So then they are good at these points. Okay, and they're not too bad at the start. And then let's look at player 4. And player 4 starts with a character, say 25. Not too bad already. So then they're doing this. Okay. And it might be that you don't play a character all the way through to age because a character might die early, you might retire early, etc. But what you can then see if you look at these bits that I've shaded in is that throughout the campaign, to begin with, player 1 is sort of the lead character. They have a lot of the limelight because they're the really capable one, whereas player 1 is tagging along. They're a novice. But then player 4 kicks in for the next phase, and then player 2, and then player 3, and then player 1 comes back round to it. And so what this means is over the course of a long campaign, an 80-session campaign, you end up with all 4 of the players being the key character, the best character, the optimal character. But at any one time, you've got characters. So if we look at this point here, okay, player 4 is brilliant. Player 3 is in decline. Player 1 is getting rapidly better. And player 2 is actually not great at all because they are just about to retire. But because they're not great in stats and injuries and all the rest of it, they still have lots of abilities. So they still have lots they can bring to it. And so what this means is over the course of a long campaign, everyone gets their time to shine, to use a school phrase. But it also means that the element of the campaign, the look of the campaign changes as we move forward. And just to finish, there is a knock-on effect of that to GMs. If you have a campaign that does this, in power level. So D&D, Savage Worlds, AFF, whatever. Then down here, you are fighting goblins, orcs, etc. Here you're fighting trolls and ogres. Okay. Here you're fighting giants. And here you're fighting dragons. Okay. In a typical campaign. What this means is, as a GM, when you plan these sessions, you do it in a very different way to planning these or these or these. Up at the top end here, you're not about, you don't have a lot of role playing, maybe so much. It's more action, it's more powerful. And as a GM, this part of a campaign can be really difficult to do. I've been GMing for 40 years. It's because you obviously get a big disparity in power levels and so on between characters. This sort of session, you can put a big boss in who is taken down in the first round because some good rolling, some optimization by the characters. And that is difficult if you are creating adventures for your campaign one by one. If you're writing a campaign, it's really, really, really difficult. By contrast with Maelstrom, what will happen is your power level is generally doing this, which means that the enemies here are about the same as the enemies here, and the enemies here, and the enemies here. Now, actually, that's probably not quite true. If we just go to a red pen, then probably the power level is doing that, maybe, simply because they're getting better resources, more money, more followers, more whatever. Okay, so there probably is a slight increase over time, but it means that these final sessions, you can have more dramatic impact than you have power level impact, because at the end here, your whole party together is not much better than it was back here. And as a GM planning a campaign, that makes it much easier to do. And I found that with the Maelstrom Doomsday campaign. The enemies 100 years after the start of the campaign are roughly the same power level as the ones at the start. Now, the characters are slightly more important locally, etc., but it holds true, this general idea, that because the power level isn't changing, it's just the importance of what the characters do. So back here, you might have clearing rats from a cellar. And up here, you might have saving the kingdom, with in here saving whole towns or defeating armies, whatever, right? But they're doing it with the same sort of power level that you see all the way through. So I realize this is a longish video, and a lot of it is about sort of game design theory and that sort of thing. But this really underpins what we want to do with the Prophecy game, which is provide a somewhat different fantasy experience to many of the other games out there. And it's not to say the other games are bad. You know, I love the Hero to Zero thing. I wrote the End Times campaign for Savage Worlds. It's brilliant to play through. We're almost played through it ourselves as part of our group. Fantastic. It's great beating these, you know, powerful enemies and saving the world. But this offers something different. And I think there is room for different games and different types of game. Hopefully that is useful, and there will be more videos on this in the coming weeks and into next year. Thank you.